Hey everyone, Adam here, Subwizard Podcast. Got another interview for you today. This is a cool one. It's another indie comic creator who's got a Kickstarter going on right now. His name is Ed Kuehnel. He has a partner, Matt, on this project. Matt has a newborn baby, so he couldn't make it to the interview, unfortunately. But we will have these guys back on the show because they're really interesting guys, really creative. The Kickstarter is for Invasion from Planet WRESTLETOPIA, and if that sounds familiar to you, we have reviewed the comic on the show before. It's a really cool comic. You don't necessarily have to like wrestling to be into it. I'm not a wrestling fan, and I really enjoyed it. I read half their series, and I'll be finishing it out. So make sure you check out their Kickstarter. Really interesting conversation with Ed, and Ed is also, and his partner Matt as well, a video game writer. So we already have another interview planned where we can talk about that fascinating field, and I'm sure we'll dive back into comics for that as well. We talk about the writing process, the Kickstarter. Really interesting. It was a lot of fun. We went way over the time we thought we were going to, but that's just more good stuff, so enjoy. Hey everyone, Adam here, Subwizard Podcast. I'm sitting down with Ed to talk about his Kickstarter campaign, Invasion from Planet WRESTLETOPIA.
Yeah.
How you doing, Ed?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me on the podcast, and thanks for taking the time to review several of the issues previously. I really appreciate it.
Definitely, yeah. It was definitely a lot of fun, and I'm not even really a huge wrestling fan, but it was still a cool. I still got some throwback vibes to it because you captured that kind of like early to mid '90s era of wrestling, I would say.
Absolutely, yeah. The story, briefly starts off in sort of the old territory days of the 80s, but then most of the story takes place during the kind of the attitude era of the 90s. And it's interesting because Matt Entin is my co-creator, co-writer. He's a bit younger than me, and I fell in love with wrestling as a kid, and it was in those territory days. He discovered it later, in the 90s attitude era. So it's kind of like both those eras are ones that respectively we each sort of discovered wrestling and fell in love with it and all that stuff.
As pretty much an outsider to wrestling, whenever I get glimpses, just by being plugged into pop culture, things like that, it does seem like that era is kind of largely the favorite, or maybe that's just my age group, but
I think it's left a huge mark on fans, and then like you said, pop culture, because you had The Rock coming out of there, who's this huge star, and even some of these other wrestlers. It's interesting, even like Stone Cold Steve Austin.
Mm-hmm.
He isn't quite the huge movie star, but he's so many people know who he is outside of wrestling, along with some of the other guys too. I'm kind of the same way these days. I keep up with it, with wrestling, sort of via Twitter and things. I haven't watched it regularly in a long time, and it has been really gratifying. The reception. So for people who don't know, Invasion from Planet WRESTLETOPIA. I'll just real quick. It's about this disgruntled pro wrestler who declares himself galactic champion of the universe to kind of cheese off his promoter. That promo, or that boast, goes into outer space because it's live TV, gets intercepted by aliens, a planet of alien wrestlers who are not pleased and invade Earth. A lot of people, the reception has been really, really great. We release these issues digitally, but we heard that a lot from people that hey, I'm not really into wrestling. Maybe I've never really been into pro wrestling, or maybe I was into it, a long time ago and stopped watching. And I really dig this story, and I think it's kind of like, if you like Galaxy Quest, that kind of satire. Like, you don't need to be a big Star Trek fan to appreciate Galaxy Quest. I think it's kind of the same with our comic. Wrestling fans really dig it, but you don't have to be a wrestling fan to get a lot out of the story. I don't think.
Yeah, I would back that up. I mean, I haven't watched wrestling since hanging out with an elementary school friend in like '96. So, but I think I might have read all of it. If not, I'm like an issue shy of finishing it.
Cool.
and I enjoyed it. It's a good story, and you embrace the ridiculousness of it, which is right up front. It's Planet WrestleTopia. Like, of
Yeah,
course, it's insane.
yeah.
So you're just along for a fun ride. You don't have to be, steeped in wrestling lore.
No, no, and yeah, obviously, yeah. So the whole concept behind WrestleTopia, we don't spend much time there, but it's just this like this alien race for whom wrestling's not just real; it's their whole way of life. Like the leader of WrestleTopia, the one true galactic champion, like they don't have elections; they have the title defenses. Like if you want to be the leader of WrestleTopia, you've got to win this belt, and it was a blast, to work on this series. Matt and I, our day job is video games, and we're really lucky to have this sort of career as writers in the games industry. Um, but this was the first thing I want to say it's the first thing we've ever done that was not work for hire. In other words, we had complete creative freedom behind doing this, and it was just a blast. And then and what, but we brought this to comics because we were sort of working on this story together, and we just thought we absolutely want this story to be out there in the world, right? We want people to be able to consume it, um, and hence the comic books. Um, and now, of course, we heard from a lot of people that they'd love to have a printed, printed copies or printed trade. So here we are at the Kickstarter, and it's off to a pretty good start. I think just before the podcast, we're over $1,700 in the early going of the campaign. I think it's closing in on 20% funded. I don't know what the metrics are for. I'm going to pretend that that's really good. I don't know what the analytics would say.
I mean, you're only a couple days in, right?
Yeah, really, just a couple days in.
Yeah, so I
So
would think 20% in a couple days is pretty solid.
sure, that's what I want to think.
Yeah.
I'll go with that.
Kickstarter, we were kind of talking about it a little bit before we realized that we weren't recording.
Yeah,
Kickstarter is this whole weird animal in itself. And for people listening, if you have done Kickstarter, I'm sure you know. And if you haven't, just try to like imagine all the logistics of not just, oh, I have this product, I wanted to get it out there, but how do you bring people to it? What else do you offer with it? How do you make it stand out? Like it's just this insane world of its own.
it's a really complicated. It's a lot more complicated than it looks for people. At least my opinion. For people who haven't done it, because we do have some really cool rewards. We have like I love trading cards, and I always have, and so we actually made some cool trading cards from the characters in our book, and we made it so that they're kind of part of the world. Like you can conceive that these cards would exist in the comic, right? Like um, they're sort of just part of the universe and part of the story. And the other thing we have is we have this cool poster where in the comic book there's a pay-per-view where Earth's fate hangs in the balance of the this match, and the pay-per-view is called Galacto Massacre. So it's just like the WWE always makes an official poster for each WrestleMania. We made like the official Galacto Massacre poster, and then you're kind of like, well, I mean, the art looks beautiful, and posters and trading cards aren't super expensive to make, actually. But then you're just kind of like, well, um, am I selling these or am I adding these as an incentive? And then but in order to pay for them, you kind of have to factor that into the price of each tier. And do I really want to be a trading card salesperson, or do I want to sell my books? It's a weird thing. Um,
Yeah. I feel
I,
like you need those items though. You need the extra stuff that make people,
yeah,
you could do your comic and a t-shirt, and I'm sure like every independent comic Kickstarter has done that. So I feel like
yeah,
you need that little something extra it's weird enough but familiar enough where people are like, "Oh, that's genius. I used to collect these." And
yeah, yeah. I would love to. Like my thought is like, one of the reasons I really, of course, we want the Kickstarter to be successful, but I would love to do more comics and more, even more WrestleTopia comics and other comics, and I kind of want to just keep making trading cards out of them and have like this whole series one, series two to be like tops, you know what I mean? Or like, Panini America, and have it be this real professional thing, this whole thing, Um, yeah, and it's, you know, Matt and I are writers. We're not marketing experts. It, well, I don't at all mind promoting the book, but I think it's hard to like ask for people because even though you're essentially asking them to pre-order, right? Like in,
Yeah.
in our case, the books are finished. We just need to kind of, and even the trade is designed. Like we had a designer put it all together. It's really just like you take pre-orders and then go to the printer. But it's yeah, it is just kind of odd, a little odd asking for money for this. And when you're on social media, it's like, well, we have some followers for the comic, but it's like, I don't know. It's like you're tweeting and you're Facebooking and you're doing all the social media, and it's like, how many of these people really care at all about comics? Um, when you're just shouting to the ether. So I think we were talking about like, hey, a marketing plan would have been nice, right? Because you want to be shouting at people that already are kind of into comics or into wrestling or both,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. How do you reach those audiences?
right? So just throwing it out there on Twitter is okay, but if half your followers are just like friends from work, then then it's not really as useful. Um, it's exciting and a little terrifying, but I am grateful. I want to say we've had 30 backers so far. Very grateful to all of you, and people have been retweeting and following, and people like yourself have brought us onto their podcast. It's really really cool. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I know, I've had a similar experience to what you're going through, and it is fun doing the media rounds and doing that aspect of the marketing, I
Yeah,
find anyway.
yeah.
It's just the more like social media marketing, like you said, yelling into the ether. It's like you feel like you're
Exactly.
taking your little bottle of green dye and dropping one drop in the ocean, being like, hopefully it turns green. Like it's
Yeah, that's interesting. Even the I went to Portland, so I live in Portland, and there's a lot of comic professionals here. And I forget how, I happened to sort of connect with Ben Dewey, who's quite a well-known comic book artist. He's done a lot of work, I think, for Dark Horse. And I don't know him super well, but he let me pick his brain on comic books a little bit, and and as even after and so we published our first issue, and I talked to him some more, and I was like, I'm every day I'm sending this comic out to podcasters and reviewers and bloggers, and no, it doesn't seem to move the needle too much as far as even like comicsology sales or Kindle sales. Not that we really ever cared how those would sell. Like we were kind of just we were just happy to make the comic, but I was a little surprised that like would get a really good response, and almost nobody would buy. Like we might sell one copy or two copies in a month, and I'd be like, is anybody out there listening care? And it's like, even getting, and we found out this is true, is like even getting a review on a large outlet, it's like throwing a message in a bottle and throwing it in the ocean, and it hopefully it'll get to a couple people, and that's all you can hope for. So I've learned to really appreciate how hard it is for like marketing people. We saw this in video. Like I mentioned, I've been in the video game industry for 20 years, and sometimes you get these requests. The dev team on a game will get these requests from a marketing group that just are like, we're like 2 weeks from launch, and hey, can you add a flamethrower to the game? And you're like,
just
no,
like that. Just throw it in there.
no, it would change everything, the level design, everything. And it's like, these people, they're not crazy. They're just desperate to give your game an edge or something, because getting people to care about something like this is so hard. It's so hard that I understand now. I get the request for the flamethrower.
Right? Yeah. There's
I,
just so much out there grabbing people's attention.
yeah. Well, we should talk about yours, because you sent me a link to your comic book, is the social studies.
Oh, did I?
Yeah, you sent me a link to social studies, and there was like a preview of issue 1, and I thought it looked really, really cool. And I didn't, there's just like a couple pages. I think there's just 3 pages on the if I'm not mistaken. I think there's just a 3-page preview.
Oh, on the website?
Yeah, but it's
Yeah,
social.
yeah. Actually, the first issue now on the website, there is a name your price option where you can put in 0 and just download a copy.
Oh, okay,
But I
okay.
don't want to. I don't want to take people off WrestleTopia.
No, but I appreciate that you're out there doing it as well. So
Yeah, I understand your pain. I don't want to. Try not to turn the tables and make it about me, but I can definitely relate to everything you're saying.
but
It is tough.
you again, we're grateful. I have to remind myself. I mean, it really was. We had worked on this story sort of independent of any medium, and Matt and I,
Mhm.
and set it aside. And it was a long time past, and we just thought, like, and we've worked on plenty of other stories. Like, lots of writers write things that just collect dust, and we had thought, like, man, we just don't want this story to just die. We got to put it out there. And I had told myself, I said, whatever happens, if we could just put this out there into the public eye, or that'll be something. That'll be victory. It'll be a really expensive hobby.
Yeah.
And so I got to remind myself, like, hey, that I can and should be grateful for that. We had wonderful support from our wives, who we couldn't have done it without them, because it was a lot of money that we both spent. and for me, a couple of people have said that to them it felt like a love letter to professional wrestling, especially professional wrestling of the 80s and 90s. And it was true. I was obsessed with it as a kid. I loved it as a kid, and I don't wax nostalgic very often, but it really did mean a lot to me when I was a kid. It really, I think, was kind of one of those things where you can look back and see, perhaps was a bit of a refuge, and perhaps this was a little bit of a just a place where a thing that brought you joy, uh, and that joy was really, you hate to look back and think what would it have been like to not have that. You know what I mean? I think I really needed pro wrestling as a kid, to get lost in, and so I'm really grateful to it. So it is kind of a love letter to this crazy entertainment form, entertainment art form. And
Yeah, and I think nostalgia is a big key, especially for like our age group. People who grew up the 80s and 90s. Like
yeah,
everything's nostalgia now. Everything's
yeah,
coming back, and I think doing such a personal story, but it's not. It's not your childhood journals and you're recreating your
right,
childhood, but it is personal. I think that does resonate with people who read it. There's just so much stuff out there. It's hard to find those people.
yeah, yeah. It is interesting. I don't know if maybe it's just the stress of our times that we're in, but nostalgia is, the air is thick with nostalgia these days. Um, I'm actually working on one of the video game projects I work on now is a game based on the sorry, I'm getting an echo. Based on the TV show, the Goldbergs, and that
Okay.
take place in the 80s, and it's
Yeah.
focuses a lot on nostalgia. And
Yeah, because that's the story of the guy's life. Like that's his
yeah,
family.
that's his life. Yeah, Yeah. So, you know, Wrestletopia is not quite that, but everyone in there sort of reminds me of somebody who was screaming at me on via my television, right? Like the protagonist, the rock and roll Rory Landell, is sort of an amalgam of all these guys I watched growing up, and you know, superstar Billy Graham, and you know, Hulk Hogan, and Randy Savage, and all those guys, and um, we have heard that as well, that it evokes, you know, a lot. So a lot of people who maybe haven't watched wrestling in many many years enjoy the story for what it is, and enjoy the humor, but also they'll say, "Oh man, this reminds me when I used to watch wrestling with my dad when I was a kid, and we'd sit and we'd watch it." And so it doesn't lean, I don't think, too strongly on that, but it is I think a plus for most people to read it.
Yeah, I would think so. And even your art style isn't a super throwback. It is very much a
Yeah,
comic book art style, but it does have that kind of older, like it's not so serious and thin lines, and it's like bright colors and a lot of fun. And
yeah. I should mention, you know, so we had one of the things we found out. You know, we did 6 issues, and the first and the last issues have quite a few pages. I think the last one's like 45 pages, because Matt and I are kind of poor planners and hadn't done a comic book miniseries before. But I guess my point was, you know, we had it was kind of hard. You know, we paid all the artists; everyone got their page rate, but to keep a team of indie artists together, you know, this took us 3+ years to make this 6 issue miniseries. We started off with Dan Scotti, really talented comic book artist who now does a web comic called Lavender Jack, which is like on its third season. It's crazy popular. He got so busy that he and he got some help with the inks on issue 3 with David Hahn, another professional. But he handed the reins over to Kendall Good, who did the art for issues 4 through 6. And Kendall has done art for quite a few of the WWE comic books that I think it's Boom puts out.
that's an
Color,
awesome get.
yeah, and so they're both really talented, and their style, and like you said, their styles are actually pretty similar. Their art styles, it's a fairly seamless transition. Colors, we had 3 different colors. We had Marissa Louise, who's very very talented. Issues 1 through 3, she got super busy. Jason Lewis stepped in for issue 4, and we ended up with Geo Butler on 5 and 6. And the lettering was almost the same. It was like 1 through 3. It's like 3 issues, and I think we just exhausted. Feel like maybe we burned out people, but Dave Lanfear, the first 3, and 4 through 6 was Slippery Sal Cipriano. Um, and you know, they're all professionals, so I mean, their work looks great. Um, we said if we were going to do this, we wanted to do it right, and I couldn't be happier with the result. You know, with their work. I mean, all those guys are just pros. So the books look great.
They do look great. They look very professional. Like nothing looks like, oh, we're just figuring it out.
No, not on their part. Maybe on our on Matt and Matt and I think you know, it turned out well. I think that our experience in video games and actually working with, we do have a lot of experience working with artists. It's mostly in the 3D space. Um, but we did have, I guess, a lot of experience in general, just sort of working on a projects with lots of moving parts and working with artists. And you know, we'd you know, writing in video games for a long time and a few other things. Um, I can definitely look and see where, like, haha, our lack of comic experience, lack of comic book experience. Uh, you know, like I said, there's a reason why the 6 issues 45 pages and the others aren't. Right?
Was that just like you had 6 as the number in your mind, and you're like, well, we got to finish the story?
I think so, and it was also like, yeah, I mean, it was, you know, the first one was 32 pages, and the next 4, you know, like I said, it was like 20, they were standard 24. Well, yeah, I think we got to that last one, and we're like, well, it's all kind of coming to a head. Um, I don't think there's a natural break in there, and we didn't really want to rush anything in that final issue.
Hmm.
There's a point or two where I honestly feel like it's even even at 45 pages, I'm like, oh, if I could have just maybe had another page or two for that this part, but
I think that's always the case in
yeah,
comics
it
because that real
probably
estate is so precious. You always wish you had an extra panel for a conversation, an extra page for
yeah.
something.
And also, and Matt was like, dude, we cannot, you've got to stop. We have this like 48 pages. It's enough. Um, so it was probably just like we get to this finish, and I don't think there's quite a natural break in there. But we probably could have made it, yeah, 7 issues to your point. And I think
I
another,
was just curious. I mean,
no, yeah, and then, but another thing that we did, being sort of being rookies with the comic book is, um, and there's a lot of, for our non-action scenes, we could have used more panels. In other words, we were really pretty consistent about, like, even if there's not a lot of physical action going on, a page would have, like, 6 big panels. And it was like, ah, we really probably should have had some of those scenes be 7 panels, 8 panels, because it was perfectly doable. And when you fail to do that, you I mean, I don't want to say waste, page space, but it's like we could have, um, you know, planned things better. Like maybe the last issue could have been, 32 pages instead of 45, 45 pages of panels and 3 pages of bonus material. But whatever. Who's counting, right?
right. Just you.
It's the pocketbook.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That is the interesting thing, too, because I always find when I'm writing, it's like, okay, we need the action because it's a visual medium. It can't just be
Yeah,
people looking at each other and talking, but
right.
you need to have people look at each other and talk at some point to get some story across. So do we
Absolutely.
have 4 blank panels or like one word bubble each, and then 2 panels at the bottom that are just text? It's really tough to spread it out.
It's tough. And I think we just sort of did the safe thing, which was like, I don't care if it's people talking, or if it's people like wrestling each other down a water slide, which happens, or wrestling each other on top of a moving train, which happens, and you in the middle of the street, because the Wrestletopians are on planet Earth, and the only way to deal with them is to wrestle them. They're like impervious to to other attacks, but which makes perfect sense, right?
Of course.
So, but I think, yeah, it was just like, okay. It would be 6 or less panels, and then if there's action, there'd be less probably than 6. And we just got, that stuck in our head that, 6 panels to a page. But if like you said, if people are talking, you don't have to be use that. You don't have to be so, dogmatic with that approach. And I will say, it's like you said, you don't. That's something that I learned too, and there's a tendency here. You don't want people just to talk, right? They're like, oh, I don't want to just have people talking. But I also feel like, hey, it's if there's good conflict, right? Because I think it's not always about the physical action that's going. I mean, physical action is important, with a wrestling comic, right, or a superhero comic. But
Right.
uh, even if they are talking, I think as long as there's conflict, if they're just sitting there talking, obviously about, another person, or if they're talking about where they want to go to lunch or something, it's boring. It's not good. If there's conflict, even when they're talking to each other, um, it's not physical action, but it's interesting, right? Like it's action. It's kind of, action. So I think we struck a good balance there. We did a fair number of things right, but it is our first comic book miniseries, so uh, we we definitely have a lot to learn. I hope we get to an opportunity to to use these lessons that we learned on something on another comic book, which would be fantastic.
How was your writing process on it? Like, did you look up how other comic book writers write, or did you just kind of write the way you guys knew how since you've been writing for so long? And
We did try to learn. I've learned this lesson with other stuff before. Um, so we read quite a few books on, like Brian. We read Brian Michael Bendis's book. I read Alan Moore has kind of a brief like treatise on comic book writing, which I think is not so much like structure and stuff, but more like his philosophies. But several books like that. Talk to some like it's this sounds like name dropping, but it's again, I live in Portland. There's a lot of professionals. So it just so happened that like Kelly Sue DeConnick and Matt Fraction, famous comic book writers who are married, it was like we didn't live too far from each other, and it was like our kids sort of were for a while in sort of the same orbit of like activities and things. And I'd bump into them, and I knew who they were, so I introduced myself and said I was a writer. So I got to like pick Kelly Sue DeConnick's brain over a lunch or two about we're comic writing for comics and self-publishing comics or what. She doesn't really self-publish, but um, Ben Dewey I mentioned. I got to know Joe Keating, who's another prominent comic books writer, worked for Marvel and did some really cool stuff for Image. Actually, had done a wrestling comic. I think that's how we met. Gosh, what's it called? Oh, Ringside. Worked on a comic book called Ringside, which is a kind of a crime noir comic with wrestlers. But anyway, we did try to learn, but Matt and I have been writing, have been writing video games for a long time, but we've also been writing together for a long time. Like we met in the early 2000s. We were working on this same video game that needed a lot of writing. And at one point we were both spent a lot of time as freelance, game writers and have been hired a lot to work on the same projects together. And we've written, other things together. We actually worked on one film that got, I think you can kind of see it like behind my shoulder there. It's hard to see, but The Lumberjack is a really cool indie horror film put out by Madisonian Pictures that we wrote a screenplay for. So Matt and I have this, we love working together, have good chemistry. And after a while you sort of develop a flow together on how to work. And so just figuring out our story, beginning, middle, and end, then trying to kind of break it down panel by panel, what should happen. Matt would do a lot of the dialogue, and I would do some too. I did a lot of the figuring out of the action sequences. Like I did a lot of my writing was describing panels to the artist. And I'm sitting here playing, I'm buying WWE action figures at the store, and I'm playing, I'm wrestling, I'm trying to figure out the action, and I got this
working
guy's
through it.
this guy's Rory, and this guy's Mini Macho, and I'm like playing, and so we just, um, did what we do, but yes, we absolutely try to get as much comic book know-how as we could. Which which thankfully there's a lot out there, right? Like there's a lot out there about writing for comics, and there's a lot of good information out there that you can absorb and about the craft piece of it. So it was all very helpful.
Did you fall down that rabbit hole where you got to a point you realized, like, I could be reading this stuff forever?
Oh
At
yeah,
some
yeah,
point, I need to just write.
absolutely. I have done that before. We didn't just do that really so much with comics, but I've done that before with screenwriting books,
Hmm.
and even just books about like writing in general. Um, there's kind of like I kind of feel like yes, after a certain point, there's some diminishing returns. I do like I still do like reading that kind of stuff. I still will. My goal is to always have at least one book on my nightstand that has something to do with writing, whether it be for a specific medium or not. Even if I'm just pecking away at it here and there.
You
But
keep that inspiration drip going.
yeah, sharpen the axe or whatever, right?
Yeah.
But you're absolutely you're absolutely right. Is that you get to this point where you pick up your 17th book on screenwriting, and you're like, okay, I when things start to repeat, like I have read all of this in the other 16 books this was covered. Right? There's just
Yeah.
you got to step away.
You realize you're doing everything around the thing without
Yeah,
actually just putting words on paper
yeah.
or on the screen. Yeah.
Brian McDonald is a great. I mean, for people out there who are writers or want to write, there's a guy named Brian McDonald who has written three books, and I especially recommend two of them. One is The Golden Theme, and one is Invisible Ink. And he there's short books, but he's great. And he's mostly focused on like screenwriting, but his general advice on writing is fantastic. But one of the points he makes is like, you absorb a lot of this knowledge about craft, and you absorb like say if you want to write screenplays, and then you're watching like really good films and breaking them down, and you're reading screenplays and trying to kind of analyze the structure or what have you. You start writing, and of course maybe at first you're not good, but you get better. But he's like all that stuff sort of shifts to the back of your brain, and is sort of and percolates or whatever, and pretty soon you're doing it somewhat subconsciously. You're starting to write, and things kind of are, you end up making good decisions somewhat subconsciously. It's all in there somewhere, and it becomes kind of like a habit. And I got that with video games, just only because I've done so many of them, right? As a freelancer, I think to date I've worked on like 80, close to 80 video games.
Wow. And that's got to be a whole different kind of writing, because it's
Yeah,
storytelling, but then there's an interactive element where you can, depending on the game, you have varying degrees of going off the beaten path.
yeah, it is really challenging, and you have to have a lot of endurance as a writer when you're working on video games.
Is it a
And
lot of really small, segmented, like, hey, write out like a story cutscene seems like it'd be the most traditional kind of writing.
yeah,
But I mean, I guess we could probably do a whole podcast just on writing for video games, because it's fascinating. It's something I know next to nothing about.
well, it was honestly, I love video games, but it was so refreshing to work on a comic book where it was linear. I mean, it jumps back and forth through in as far as their timeline. It jumps back and forth a little bit, but it's this linear medium, and you're working with. You start off working with not 5 artists, not 10 artists, not 25 different artists. You start working with one artist
Right.
who draws the thing, and then there's one artist who colors. And it was funny. We thought briefly for like 5 seconds, like, oh, should we do black and white? And it costs less. I'm like, dude, it's professional wrestling. You can't do professional wrestling without color. And then there's one artist who does the lettering, and you're working with these guys, kind of more or less one at a time. And it was from a production standpoint so nice.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure.
There's like 5 or 6 people involved in the whole freaking thing. And I can see where comic books is not easy at all. I can see why, some people say, oh, it's a miracle that any comic gets made. And I get it, but try working on a video game with like 45 people over 2 years.
Not to mention the stakes involved with a major title video game, because a comic is expensive. You paid your artists, you paid your inkers, you paid your colors, you paid your letterers, and that really adds up. But then if you look at like the numbers that takes to go into, and then what if like a AAA title produces, it's insane numbers. Like it's way more than you'd ever imagine.
or even not a AAA title, right?
Yeah,
Like
that's a good point. Yeah, yeah.
I can afford, like Matt and I together, we could. I mean, technically, we couldn't really afford a comic book, but we can't afford to make any kind of video game. I mean, besides, I mean, there are some, of course, examples of just really bare bones indie games, but
But if you wanted to make
right,
WrestleTopia into a video game, it would be really hard for the two of you to write a script and then hire a team to do
yeah,
it.
yeah, that doesn't happen without major, financing, and
You better be learning some programming.
yeah, that doesn't happen without, that doesn't happen for WrestleTopia because it's not a big, license and all that. But yes, yeah, uh, comic books is somewhat accessible,
Hmm.
right? I mean, here Matt and I, we can't draw. We didn't want to ask any artists to work on it for free. We didn't want to ask any. Oh, well, just work on this, and you can own part of the IP. I mean, part of that wasn't just selfishness on our part, but part of it was also like indie comics don't make any money. Like the chances of this taking off and making real money are small. So I don't want to dangle that in front of an artist because it's so much work for them. And also, I mean, if you have an artist who's working for free and then someone comes along and says, "Hey, I want to pay you," they have to stop working on your
Yeah,
stuff.
they say see you later, but you can't
They
blame
have,
them. It's their livelihood.
yeah, they have to eat. They have to pay their rent. You can't. And then, like I said, even paying artists their page rate, even then, it's hard to keep them together on an indie project because if you have an artist and they're working on your project, and then DC calls and says, "Hey, I need you to, do this X amount of work, and it's a rush job, and we need you now." What are you going to say to DC? You're not going to say no. You're going
Yeah,
to say,
burn that bridge.
right? You say, "I'm sorry, I'm working for these two yahoos on their wrestling comic book." You have to say yes. So, um, it's but anyway, it's still accessible. Like we're paying these artists, and it took a couple of years, but we made 6 comic books exactly the way we wanted. Um, Not flawless, but the mistakes are ours, and the story is all there, and we're really proud of it. And as I said earlier, it's just like wanting to get it in the world in a form that it exists. Right? If it was just a script, it doesn't really exist because nobody wants to read your script.
Yeah,
Like,
the kind of story you did, like you could write it into a novel, but it's such a visual thing.
yeah, I mean, but yeah, of novel maybe, but to write it like a screenplay or
Oh, okay, so
even
you're
a
saying, yeah.
comic book script, and it's like, man, your parents don't even want to read that stuff. But you give somebody a comic book, and they're great, and they can absorb that an issue of a comic book in 20 minutes and have a great time with it. And you get to feel that glow, right? They enjoy it, and it makes your story exists, and it makes you happy, and they're happy, and it's a great feeling.
Hmm.
Um, and without comic books as a medium, we wouldn't have been able to do that. So
Yeah, that is true. It is a nice, accessible with some hurdles. It's not the easiest thing in the world
right,
to just
yeah,
make a comic book,
no,
but it's doable and it's attainable. And I feel like with the pursuit of it, we didn't have quite the cost issues you do because me and my buddy were just like a two-man team. So we didn't have that being prohibitive, even though we pay to print it and try to get it out there in the marketing and stuff. But just the time, like people don't realize the time it takes to do one page of a comic book is
yeah.
insane.
I mean, I have sympathy for the artist. Really, I mean, I'm a writer. I like being a writer. Uh, I'm not, I haven't written novels. I've written video games. I'm not like, I'm more of an entertainer than a serious writer, but still, I have a lot of respect for writing and writers, and I'll just say flat out, I mean, writing a script for a comic book is way easier compared to what these artists have to sit down and do, 32 pages, for one issue. Another issue was at least regarding the panels was 45 pages of panel. I don't know how Kendall Good did it, and he was pretty much he was kind of a machine like Kendall Good. He he will put his head down and work, but it's just labor intensive.
Yeah.
All these people, the lettering and the coloring and the graphic designers, it just so it felt a little bit sometimes like I don't want to. I think Matt and I are very proud of what we wrote, and we cared a lot, and we had the advantage of we worked on these scripts for a long time before we decided to pull the trigger on hiring artists. But it felt a little bit like we have the easy job. You just write the script and then lay back in a hammock with some lemonade while while these people work really hard. Um, it felt like that anyway at times,
Yeah, I mean, everyone does their part because I mean,
Yeah,
there's times where writing and the pacing and stuff, it does take practice, and you guys have years of practice writing, so maybe that felt second nature to you. But
yeah. I think
for
some.
maybe somebody listening, if they just said, "Hey, I have this great idea, I
Yeah,
want to make it a reality," it's like start putting in the time.
and I think also that there's two of us. So what I have come to understand from other people, even about like writing partnerships, is uh, you can get much further along in the process faster than you realize. So um, because we're working together and because we you complement each other well and trust each other, it's like we do a couple drafts, and I think like if you were to describe it this way, like our third or fourth draft feels like a sixth or seventh draft, maybe because there's two of us, not because we're so awesome, but because you've got two of people working together. And literally, I mean, it makes sense. It could literally be like, okay, you're going to write all Manifest Destiny's dialogue. He's the well, he's uh, one of the characters in the comic who's the one true galactic champion. Because you're good at that. You're going to do that, and then I'll work on like the action, what the action should be, or I'll write the scene where the world leaders gather together in Sweden to talk about the Wrestletopian invasion. So there's the division of labor, right?
Yeah, yeah. So you get the script done a lot quicker with that.
Yeah, yeah. And
And
so
then once you do your individual parts, do you I don't know how close you live, or do you call each other and then just kind of like go through it beginning to end while you assemble it? And then maybe if it's a scene you wrote, he's like, "Oh, and what if this happens or this comes in here?" And
we might be. I mean, I think that we're kind of planners, so we're pretty solid on what's going to happen. Um, we tend not to make any big changes when once we get to the dialogue phase. We tend to want to do that earlier. And there were some big changes, actually the ending of the Galacto Massacre pay per view. We had originally had a different ending in mind, and the one we have now I think is much better. Mini Macho was uh, yeah, uh, he's a wrestler with dwarfism, and he's from Mexico, and he's a wrestler, and he ends up traveling with Rory. Ends up being sort of part of Rory's crew. Originally, he was just going to appear in like the first issue and kind of go away, and then we're like, oh man, we love Mini Macho too much. He's got to so you know. But mostly, it's like when we get to the dialogue phase, it's like okay, this all the heavy lifting's done, and Matt would write stuff, and I'd read it, and we'd talk about it, and vice versa, and you know, um, a lot of times it'd be like I'd read what Matt wrote for Manifest Destiny, for example, and just be like, this is awesome. And then sometimes you're like, I don't know, this is working, and we trust each other. And if often enough, if I write something and Matt doesn't feel like it's working, and I can think about it for a minute and be like, yeah, you're right, it really isn't working, is it? Um, and then we might brainstorm something better. There was one scene, I guess, to your point, like there's this final Galacto Massacre pay per view, and Rock and Roll Rory Landell who has been sort of off the map, who's just, became washed up as a wrestler, and no one could find him, and everyone forgot about him, until the Wrestletopians invaded Earth looking for him. But he shows up. He shows up to Galacto Massacre, and I think like originally he came to the ring, and I forget what was supposed to happen, but we had something going on that and Matt was trying to write it, and it just wasn't working, and we both feel responsible, right? Because we both worked on the story and the structure and the plot. So I think I finally was like, okay, he's been gone. He's been out of the public spotlight for 15 years. He shows up at this pay per view. He's not gonna. If you're a wrestler, what do? You don't say like, yeah, I'm sorry, I was a washed up bum for 15 years. If you're a wrestler, you cut a promo. And so he cuts this like outlandish promo that's completely false about how he was like, flying around the galaxy defending his belt, his galactic championship belt. and it was and Matt loved it. I think Matt ended up writing most of that dialogue. But it was yeah, it was like we just coming back together, looking at the script, what's working like we expected it to work, what feels kind of off to at least one of us, if not both of us, and then maybe trying some different approaches. But I think our style is not very improv. It's more we're more plotters and planners.
I guess you would have to be. I mean, as soon as I ask the question, it's like, wait, the video game world, that doesn't fly. Like, you can't figure it out as you go.
Yeah, that's a really good point. No, it does not work at all. And video game writers are not, in most instances. Uh, I mean, yes, you may have a creative director who's very high up on the food chain and has a real strong vision for the story. But in general, the writers on the game are pretty far down, really, the totem pole. So it's just like, hey, that's nice that this level is in, the storytelling that takes place in this, entire like hour-long sequence is integral to your story. But guess what? It's cut and it's gone. We're behind schedule and it's cut. And okay, yes, thank you,
I guess we'll fit all that in somewhere else.
thank you. I appreciate, thank you. Whatever you say, sir. You know, we're not. It's not like the theater where you cannot change a word of my script.
Yeah, that's a different world for sure.
Yeah. But yeah, it's just like you said, you did this, everything, affects. You can't just be like, oh, I had a great idea. What if instead of, I know you guys have worked like for months to create a 3D world that's set on a desert planet, but I have a great idea for something different.
Yeah, wouldn't it be awesome if it was a jungle? No.
No, because we spent like $1 million making a desert world with like 14 different artists and, modelers, texture artists.
Yeah, it's like look, footprints are left in the sand. We're not throwing that away.
You are fired, sir. Yeah,
that's funny.
Yeah, we talked a lot about writing, which I love. I don't actually talk too much about like writing stuff on for whatever reason on these podcasts, but hopefully.
I mean, maybe it's selfish when I do these kind of interviews, but I always try to ask the deeper questions. I feel like they're more interesting to listen to rather than just like, the same boilerplate 12 questions you might have gotten a million times, but also I'm consider myself something of a writer, so
yeah,
I get to pick your brain.
It's great. It's fun. I try not to overthink it too much. I mean, I think, like I said before, video games are about entertainment for the most part. I mean, it can be more than that, but personally, myself, I'm like, okay, I'm a writer, and I'm really more, I think, of a, entertain. I'm really more of an entertainer ultimately. Like, I don't consider myself to be an artist at all, and I'm comfortable with that. I like what I do.
There's nothing wrong with that.
No, and there's a need for it, right? And I also
big time, especially now.
And I also respect writers who aspire to do more. I mean, it's what makes things great. Comic books is eye opening because video games tend to be dominated by, maybe by creatives that are kind of like me, in the fact, insofar as we're out there to entertain. Sometimes even a video game with kind of a cool story uh, is like a collection of scenarios, even more than like a real true story. Comic books has a lot of people who are I don't know, very literary minded,
Hmm.
and do stuff that I think can be described as artistic. And obviously, there's a lot of just entertainment, which is fantastic. Like a lot of our superhero stuff is entertaining. Just I would say is more squarely in like the let's entertain you type of field. But so many, there's so many great writers and comics doing indie stuff that's I think pretty artistic, almost pretty artistic, right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
It was interesting to be in this comic book space, and you're trying to learn from everybody that's in it already, and so many of them are um just really smart people, and could qualify, I guess, as artists versus just people like me who are writing a lot of voice calls for characters when they get shot, or have a rock thrown on them or something. Right? Yeah.
That's one of the things that I find so fun about the comic world, especially indie comics, because indie comics, maybe my experience is just too limited, but it seems like, hey, I have this insane idea, and you could do it in an indie comic, and no one looks at it and like that's way too ridiculous for comics. Get out of here. There's just no such thing as going too far.
Yeah. It, it's awesome with comics is what they say is pretty much true. If you can imagine something, an artist can draw it. If you can think of something and you can describe it to somebody, they can draw it. It's kind of maybe the same way in video games, but when you're working in 3D, I don't think that's quite always so true.
Things
Um,
have to kind of make more sense even in a cartoon 3D world.
yeah, I mean, the 3D is just more complicated and it's more expensive. But I also, um, I mean, yes, I think if you gave a 3D artists, plural, enough time and money, they could probably do anything. But when you're doing comic books and everything's 2D, I mean, you have to think of, obviously, as your panels as snapshots. They're not animated, but beyond that, there's not a whole lot of limitations on. I mean, if you can imagine it, they can draw it, and they can draw it pretty darn quickly. Like, to do a page in a day and to draw some whacked out thing that you thought of, that's really cool. Like, that's just a trip, you know.
Yeah. Do you remember that feeling you had? Sorry, I'm kind of jumping tracks.
Yeah.
When you first hired the artist and you turned over some pages and you got that first piece of art back, even if it was just concept art.
Yeah, that was pretty thrilling. I think to have Dan, I think we started, with just some character sketches to get the look down for at least the important characters. Then there's the thumbnails, which are pretty darn, that's the whole point, is they're pretty rough, just to make sure that everything's kind of looks the way we all feel like it should. Then there's the pencils, and that was probably the first. Yeah, that was like, oh my god, wow, that's really coming alive. And the inks, like, oh my gosh. And I think it was like the colors, and you're just like, with the inks and the colors, you're just like, holy mackerel, there it is. There's just kind of our imagination, and it brought to life. And of course, the lettering, having the first round of lettering, like, this is a comic book, this is an actual comic book. Like, it's also another wow moment. But yeah, I think it's probably like, somewhere between the pencils and the inks, where you're like, oh my god, this is happening. And this artist is a genius, because they can take my words and make them something real that people
Yeah.
absorb. It's and this is the first thing. Matt and I have been in video games since the early 2000s, and everything we do is work for hire. which we're grateful to do. But this is the first thing I think either of us have ever done that's our own. It's completely our own, complete creative freedom. Um, we were doing this for ourselves, so you have all this ownership over uh, over what we're doing and the comic books, and it was just like, yeah, it's very personal. I don't know. It was quite a trip. When we got the first one done, we just did this very limited print run at a local print shop called Color House here in Portland. They do a great job, and they were pretty expensive. It's 32 pages color. We wanted to be really nice. We were also going to use them for giveaways to try to get like a publishing deal, which is naive of us. But what we did was, but we took some of these copies, and I went to like 3 comic book stores, and I just said, look, can you want to just sell these on consignment? And they're like, yeah, okay, we could charge like $5 and give you half. Well, we've already lost money, right?
Yeah, you're only making $1 a comic if they sell it for $5. Yeah,
like it cost me $4 to print, and I get $2.50 back. Right? All I wanted to do was see it on the shelf, right?
yeah,
I was just like, so I just 3 different comic book stores. There's one of them I never even went back to. I was like, yeah, sure, you keep half. I just put it on. I put it on the shelf. They put it on the shelf, and I took a picture, and I was like, "Holy mac, there it is!" There's Invasion of Planet WRESTLETOPia is alive and on the shelf, and it was just that was phenomenal.
that's awesome. Yeah, that's got to feel really good.
Yeah, I'm still, it still is. I'm trying to hold on to that feeling. It's still great, and we'd love to have this printed trade happen. So, what I would tell people is not, please come check out our Kickstarter. I want you to back it because I think it's a great book. It's fun. It's funny. You don't have to be a wrestling fan to really dig this redemption story. You know, if the book speaks to you, please come and back it. Or you maybe a friend or two who you think it might be perfect for.
Yeah, you got to know somebody who's into wrestling,
or both. Or into comics, into wrestling,
into wrestling. Yeah,
into both. If you're into both, it's kind of it feels like, again, we've been sending people the PDFs forever and selling them digitally. If you're into comics and wrestling, it tends to be a slam dunk that you'll enjoy this. So yeah, we'd love to see it come alive again in print this time.
yes, definitely. I'm going to put a link to the Kickstarter in the description. I tried to put it in this scroller at the bottom, but Kickstarter does not allow for short links, it seems.
Oh, really? Okay.
Well, I mean, Kickstarter lets you link, but I've never seen like Kickstarter.com/WrestleTopia. Like, I've never seen one that easy.
Right. It is it is a not even I think that is our vanity link, is the complex.
Yeah, I'll link to it so people can click on it. But if you go to Kickstarter and search WrestleTopia, it's the only WrestleTopia there, so you'll find it.
I will say, like, this is embarrassing, but like we were all ready to launch the campaign, and I accidentally went live with it like a week early, and I panicked, and I had to, like, there's no backers, we didn't promote it, but I had to cancel it, and then we had to like start a whole new one, and so we can launch it on the day that we wanted to. So if you search WrestleTopia, you'll see 2 WrestleTopia projects. One's canceled, but one is not. Back the one that's not canceled. It's yeah, and that was not on Kickstarter. That was on me. That was on my stupidity. So
yeah, it's that steep learning curve we were talking about. Do you want to tell? Do you have your like socials for it, or a website you want to point people to all as well?
Love to. So we're pretty active on Twitter. So on Twitter, we are. The company we started, Matt and I, in order to waste money, was Suspicious Behavior Productions. So Twitter handle is SB as in boy, P as in Paul, SBP_comics, plural, on Twitter. You can also find us on Facebook. I think we are, let's see here. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Tumblr. We're not very active on Instagram at all. Facebook, you can just at suspicious behavior, all one word, is sort of our handle. Because it was just suspicious behavior, all one word. You can find us there. And of course, like I said, you can find digital copies of the single issues on Amazon Kindle, iBooks. We they're they will be on Comixology soon. Um, and the single issues do have some exclusive bonus material to them that won't be in the trade. However, the trade that we're doing this Kickstarter for, it will have its own exclusive sort of bonus material to it, and it's all the bonus material for everything we've done. Is stuff we spent a lot of time on to try to make really cool. So, you know, yeah, please give it a look, and please back if you like fun, laughter, comic books, wrestling, any of those things, good stories. Check it out and you'll back it. You won't be disappointed. But maybe at the very least, like we said, you get it. Somebody who will appreciate you for turning them on to Invasion from Planet WRESTLETOPia.
Awesome, Ed. Good luck with everything, and thanks for taking the time to come on.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me. It was really fun.
Absolutely, yeah. I'd like to thank Ed one more time for taking time out of his day to come onto the show and talk to me about Invasion from Planet WRESTLETOPia. It's a really cool comic, really well done, bright, vivid colors, great line work, great lettering, great story. You don't have to be a wrestling fan to enjoy it. You just have to like fun storytelling. Comics probably helps, but it's great. I highly recommend you check it out. We did review issues on the site before, as I mentioned, so you can find those as well. Please remember to like and subscribe to our channel. Really helps us grow our audience. We've been getting some great feedback from these recent interviews, and I really appreciate the people taking the time to not only come on, but you, the listener or viewer, for taking the time to let us know what you think. Also, make sure you listen to So Wizard Podcast every single week wherever you get your podcasts. SoWizardPodcast.com is your resource for reviews, videos, merchandise, recommendations, and more. So Wizard Podcast can also be found on Patreon, where for as little as $1 a month, you get multiple monthly bonus shows. And on a more personal note, a friend and I released a comic book at the beginning of this year. It's called Social Studies. You can find it at socialstudiescomic.com. It's a slice-of-life comedy comic about the high school experience. We write it like a sitcom. It kind of reads like storyboards for animation. We keep the energy up. We keep the fun up. And the whole thing is taken and shoved through the prism of the 90s cartoons that we grew up on and influenced everything we're doing. So if you have an extra minute, after you check out Invasion from Planet WRESTLETOPia on Kickstarter, check out Social Studies on socialstudiescomic.com. The first issue now is, the digital copy is Name Your Price, which can be $0 if you want it to be. So check it out. You got nothing to lose. Thanks.